Good morning. How many of you have ever rented an apartment? Of those, how many of you have ever had difficulty paying the rent? Life has a way of throwing difficulties in our path, and for that reason, there will always be a need for public housing. Public housing was initiated in 1934 with the creation of the Reconstruction Finance Department, or the RFC, as a response to the Great Depression and World War II. During the Great Depression, many people lived in substandard housing, which did not have running water or heat. The RFC was the government's first involvement in the housing field. After World War II, there was a huge increase in the construction of new homes in the suburbs, which created a lot of abandoned buildings and homes in the cities. The government's response to this problem the government responded to this problem with the Housing Act of 1949, which allocated funds for demolition and urban redevelopment. The Housing Act of 1954 amended this act to include funding for rehabilitation and conservation. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, oversees approximately 3,300 housing agencies across the country. Modern-day public housing is government-owned housing where rent is not fixed, but is based off of the income of the individual families. There are approximately 1.3 million families living in public housing today, and almost 13.7 million families who spend at least half of their income just for their rent. Without public housing, there would be no place for low-income families to live, and they would become homeless. In order to qualify for low-income housing, an applicant cannot make more than $35,600 in a year's time. Public housing has been viewed in the past as a reward for those who are undeserving, and most people agree that these projects are a toxic environment for the residents. Living in public housing developments subjects the tenants to increased crime, drugs, social problems, and poor academic performance. Most families in public housing are elderly, disabled, or headed by women with single women with children. There are some basic responsibilities to live in public housing. Some of them are to pay rent and other charges on time, to keep housing clean and sanitary, report any changes in income or family size to management. Do not disturb the tenants or the other tenants or your neighbors, and to remain crime-free. Failure to comply with these rules will result in termination from public housing. Rent is based off the family's income and is generally 30% of the total household income minus any allowable deductions. Service corporations help public housing residents and connect them with education, job training, or placement in a job training program. They also connect them with computer and financial literary services in an effort to help them become self-sufficient. There are also programs that help residents attain the goal of purchasing a home. The Housing Authority is responsible for the management and operation of the program by assuring compliance with the lease terms by the resident, making sure rent calculations are done correctly, and annual renewal of income verifications is completed on time. It is also the job of the Housing Authority to terminate leases when the rules are not followed. In general, following the rules means you can stay in public housing as long as you comply. As funding for public housing decreases, housing agencies have received inadequate federal subsidies, and must raise revenues, cut operating costs, or tap other resources to make the shortfall. As shortfalls have grown deeper and have continued year after year, a growing number of agencies have had no choice but to take measures that harm the vulnerable people that they serve. A family with a home to go to every night makes a happy family, and that's why there will always be a need for public housing.